Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Great Day Houston. Okay, so we know more about it today than ever, but it's still somewhat of a medical mystery to many. I'm talking about autism. It doesn't act the same in everyone, which impacts both diagnosis and treatment. Our first guest, psychiatrist Dr. Tarnow and child psychologist Dr. Myah Gittelson, say the use of modern comprehensive assessment and modern neurotechnology is critical to give families the best head start. Okay, I know I said a mouthful there. We'll explain it in a second. Neil Hughes was a bright child, but often misunderstood. Brain mapping later in life helped solve the puzzle. If he and his family knew then what they know now, it would have saved you a lot of time and some agony, huh?
Correct, yes.
All right. Dr. Tarnow, let's just start with the definition of autism. We're hearing more and more about it today, and by the way, April is Autism Awareness Month.
Right, yeah, it is. Autism is something that is very, very difficult to describe because every patient who has autism looks different. And so therefore, it's very hard to be able to define it specifically. Yeah. But the things we use in terms of medicine is around the social difficulty, the levels of communication difficulty, and particularly the overwhelming sensory issues. And the feelings that people get are overwhelming for them because they can't block those feelings out. Yeah. And that's a major part of it.
You know, we're talking about the range of what you see. Sometimes people fly kind of under the radar. And Neil, that was the case with you. Kind of flew under the radar for a while. Explain what your childhood was like and how you knew you may have been different than some of the other kids and how that led to them, how they treated you, but there was no answers.
No, and that's the time that I grew up. So I was born in '70, and we have language now for what I was dealing with. But my first assessment was when I was a 9-year-old. So they could see the difference.
And what types of things were happening?
Well, I was struggling, so they needed to know if they could teach me, how are they going to teach me? And so they sent me to an assessment to figure out what my educational needs were. Yeah.
How did other kids treat you?
In terms of the stereotypes of autism, we have a lot of TV ideas about autism, but I'm a different type, so I have hyper empathy, so I get along with everybody, but then I also tell the truth, and so then I have a lot of conflict. So it's a very mixed bag with me. I'm not sure how to even, all I know is that I was getting a lot of medication for a lot of things, and then when I finally had my autism formal diagnosis, psychiatrist said, oh, well, people like you don't respond to medication. Ooh,
okay, Dr. Gittelson, he said very mixed bag, and therein lies part of the problem, but that really can also start to impact self-esteem as well.
Yes, I think that also recognizing and understanding the child is important for their self-esteem. If they feel misunderstood, they're going to feel poorly about themselves.
Yeah. Well, they're frustrated by teachers, they're frustrated by their parents, they're frustrated by everyone around them.
Right, well, the message is, you're very intelligent, why are you doing this? If you're so intelligent, you should be able to do better.
All right, a turning point for you was getting the qEEG brain mapping. And what did that do in terms of freeing you from some things that you were kind of stuck to?
So I've talked about this with all my doctors. I feel itchy, not pain, I feel itchy. And I have terror, not anxiety. And I have a sense of confusion. And they're like, we don't know what that is. I'm like, well, you're calling it depression, anxiety, but I'm having something that's global and it's creating all these behavioral issues. And when I first had my first session, I was like, this feels like I'm skateboarding. It literally felt like and I can't tell you how many hours I've spent on a skateboard so I could have that feeling. Yeah. And it was brain coherence. It was having this networks of the brain working together finally without having to do something physically, which is what the stimming does. Yeah. It's like I could do this just natively if I'd had help from, I always say this, I wish I knew you, Jay, when I was 9. I wish someone had been there for me.
Yeah. All right, we're going to give an example of that skateboarding analogy that you have in just a second, but first, the brain mapping. I remember you saying to me before, because my son was one of your early kids that you brain mapped, and you said, look, psychiatrists are guessing, and when you're good at it, you can be good at it, but sometimes you're not right on, the brain is so complex that this brain mapping gives you another tool to work with where you can pinpoint things. And I remember when you looked at my son's results, you went, there it is. And it changed everything because his medication also changed.
Right. Because in medicine, in psychiatry, I should say, what we do is we guess. we guess which medicine might work for this person based on their behavior. But when you have a brain map and you actually see what exactly is going on, then you can be selective in terms of choosing which medicine is best for this person.
Yeah.
And we have a huge amount of data now to be able to define which ones will help and which ones will make things worse.
And this also helps with people dealing with depression, for example. How many times have somebody dealing with depression not taken their medicine or stopped taking their medicine because it just doesn't work for them, or they don't feel good, or it may be the wrong medication? Brain mapping can give you a better idea of what they might need.
Exactly. And I always tell my patients, I like complainers. Please complain.
Yeah.
Because then I get to know exactly what's going on. Don't hide it from me. Let me know.
Yeah, and the earlier the better, Dr. Gittelson.
Yes, we really have learned a lot, and we're doing better every day. But early intervention is the key when you're looking at autism.
Yeah, I want to share a little bit about your family background. So Dr. Tarnow, as we always say, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. The reason why a lot of people just love you as a doctor who's dealt with their children who has ADHD, dyslexia, autism, is because you are on that so-called spectrum yourself. And your mom was on top of it, and it's like a second job. It really is, to make sure that your child can get kind of over the hump, if you will.
Oh yeah, it was amazing. My parents, again, not being educated people, but knew exactly and seemed to how to be helpful to me. So I have ADHD and dyslexia, so I couldn't read until I was in 3rd grade. And what I couldn't do is I couldn't do phonetics. My parents put me in the best school in Bronxville, New York, which was in Westchester, and they were teaching this new method of reading, phonetics. Yeah. And I just couldn't do it. So I had to memorize all the words, and then I could start reading.
Yeah.
So the other thing amazing is that my dad, when I had to read a book, so I couldn't read, he would go and get the movie and get he had a big sound projector and play the movie for me over and over, so I get to know exactly what goes on.
Wow. All right. You have 3 kids, and as we mentioned, that apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I know I'm the ADHD one, and my son's dad's the dyslexic one, so my son got both. And this is one of the apples right here, by the way. So
the apple of my eye.
Yeah. About what it was like for you growing up, and you were saying, can you believe this one is where she is right now? Because it was to the point where you struggled so hard that you were homeschooled rather than going to school with other kids, right?
What was very interesting is I was tested a lot, and we didn't have brain mapping back, when I was being assessed, and the person analyzing the data really couldn't make sense of what exactly I had.
Yeah, because you're smart, but things weren't producing, in terms of grades and things.
Right. I definitely know now that what's common in our family is our brains develop later or mature later in terms of our intelligence, and we know how to use our intelligence when we hit about 25.
Yeah.
And so that's what happened to me. When I became 25,
3 more years to go, Duncan. Oh, wait, sorry.
everything just blended. Everything came to light. I became very intelligent.
Yeah. With that said, we don't want to wait to 25 before we do intervention. So one of the things you do as a specializing in early childhood intervention is that, so many things have to happen in the beginning, because a lot of parents can really get frustrated, like I said, and just think, do you just have a bad seed, right? And then you keep getting the reports from, you're at odds with the teachers, you're at odds, and it just becomes, it's really tough. And I always try to tell parents, trust me, you'll see the advancements happening as they begin to mature, but you also have to understand that it's not their fault. You're going to have to give them the tools to bring this together.
Support.
Yeah.
That's what I look at. How can we support this child? So we're looking at what they're presenting in terms of the standardized testing, but also how it plays out on a day-to-day. Because again, with my testing, I looked intelligent on testing, but it wasn't being accessed. I wasn't applying that level.
Yeah.
And so we have to figure out what supports does that child need to be able to apply to their full potential.
And how many times do we hear the stories of kid just didn't do well in school at all, but Thomas Edison and Bill Gates are going to be fine. And so sometimes in that school setting, where there's certain controls and certain ways we want every kid to do stuff, can sometimes be the toughest once they get out and do what they want to do. I remember Neil Bush talking about that, who was also dyslexic, and his mom, Barbara Bush, of course, worked very hard in education. He said, once I got into college, I soared, and everybody's like, where did that kid come from? And there's a
Same thing
reason-
for me.
Yeah, same thing for you,
I
yeah.
got to college and all of a sudden I was doing really, really well.
Yeah,
But
And,
the question is, what do we do earlier?
yeah.
Right.
What do
earlier?
we do earlier? And the difficulty right now is we're parents wanting, feeling anxiety and wanting something now.
Yeah.
And so some are getting into the trap of medication. Some are bouncing around different schools. It's really, there's no perfect school.
Yeah.
You have to use the resources you have and figure out what the child's needs are and how can we support them.
Yeah.
And Myah does the qEEGs, and doing the qEEG gives her a picture of the brain. But she also does neuropsychological testing. The most important part that I find with her is she really connects and understands the child.
Yeah.
And then she can take that and explain it to the parents and get them to understand what are the things they need to do.
Yeah.
And it may be very different than what the parent feels comfortable with.
Well, and that's what you taught us. It's like you
Right.
imagine like drinking 40 cups of coffee and then being in a straitjacket sitting in a corner of a room. It's like he's got all this burst of energy and things that it doesn't work the way we think it should logically work.
Right.
And there's a big difference between what you wish would happen and what is really happening, right? And so we got to mitigate those two things. All right, back to the skateboard analogy that you have. And so I want you to demonstrate that and explain that. My son is over
Sure.
here, so.
So a lot of what autism is sensory integration issues. Duncan, come hold my hands first.
All right.
So what happens here is Duncan has a nervous system, and bend your knees, and put your feet out a little wider. And now he's co-regulating with me with my hands. So I'm going to pull on this hand, and then I'm going to pull on this hand. And I do this this is for young kids and parents. So I have a bunch of interventions to get parents to connect.
And he had said to me earlier, he goes, I really have never skateboarded and I don't feel comfortable skateboarding.
No,
He's
and
like nodding his head.
I don't want him to skateboard. I
Right.
want him to do something with me.
Right.
And now I looked at you, and he got weak. So when I'm focused on him, it's called hypotonia. Jay, is that the name? Hypotonic.
Yeah, hypotonic.
Jay is able to give me all the words for what I'm doing. Okay. Thank you, Duncan.
Yeah, this is really interesting because when I met Neil and he showed me this, I'm like, this is perfect. He took me out and we got a skateboard for my office because parents sometimes are mixed matched. They're not exactly co-regulating with their child, and their anxiety or their low energy, whichever the mix match is not really supporting the child.
Yeah.
So once they feel co-regulated, you can do a lot of things. You can actually be compliant.
Because they're actually working together right here. Is this something where even something like dancing and all that type of stuff can help as well?
Oh, yes. Whatever.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing. That's the creativity that Myah has, is the ability to look at a child and see what they need. And so it's horseback riding, dancing, skateboarding. For me, it's skiing.
Yeah.
Right? So everyone has something that they sort of feel comfortable. And for some children, right, it's the whole stemming that they do.
Right.
And the stemming is a way they are learning to calm
Keep 'em-
themselves
yeah.
down. What I would like is for them to take that and be able to present that in different ways in their life. And get it broader in other ways to be able to do that same feeling.
Myah, so if somebody's child has just been diagnosed, because all parents, whether it's autism, whether it's ADHD, whether it's dyslexia, what would you say to that parent to do right now?
Get your team, figure out who understands your child, what your child's needs are, and work proactively. I really, really focus on a proactive plan instead of reactive plan. So if your child has things that they maybe cause a meltdown, it's working on proactively preventing the meltdown, not reacting to the meltdown.
Yeah.
Rehearsing.
Rehearsing.
That's what we do. We rehearse.
Yeah.
We rehearse the meltdown.
Well, I just want to end with, I sent someone to you recently, and they were really struggling, and the daughter's been brain mapped, and I ran into him and said, how's she doing? He goes, all of a sudden we have an A student. Didn't know that student existed until we got the right plan and the right team in place. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. To connect with psychiatrist Dr. Jay Tarnow and child psychologist Dr. Myah Gittelson, you can visit greatdayhouston.com, and we will make sure that you get connected.